this painting, this is Van Curler again, Arent Van Curler. Now we're north in the river. We're about 6 miles north of Fort Orange, at the entrance of what was called the Little River. The Hudson River is in the background. This is the Little River. And off the Little River on the flats, Van Curler had a farm. On board his bark, you can see he has some horses. And here in the foreground, we have 2 Iroquois canoes, elm bark canoes, coming out to investigate the cargo. The Indians never traded for horses. We know that there were a few incidents that are described in the court records of Indians shooting horses, and that's what the purpose of the gun here is in the back of the canoe. The canoe material I got up in Canada, we have some pretty good examples of how the Iroquois built their canoes out of elm bark, and that's what's represented here. In the lower Hudson River, the Algonquin people made their canoes out of logs. They were dugout canoes. This is a painting that I did called Departure of the Jesuit. A lot of what we know about New Netherland comes from the writings of Isaac Jogues, who was a captive of the Mohawks who had been rescued by the Dutch. And in his time of recuperation, he wrote about the northern part of New Netherland, the Rensselaerswyck area, and then later about Manhattan. So here we have the Jesuit being rescued. The dominie of the Dutch Church is making sure that all the plans are set to get him out of the colony down to Manhattan and back to Europe. This is a painting that I did of a Dutch-style house that was built in south of Albany in the Selkirk area. It's one of 4 Winnie houses. This is the 3rd generation Winnie house. It was built in 1720. About a year ago, I was commissioned by the Metropolitan Museum to do a painting for the American wing of the house that was built by this man's son. The Met is interested in this because on the 3rd floor of the American wing, they're constructing a new exhibit on Dutch colonial life. And the painting that I created is to try to give this a sense of what it was like to live in a tenant farmhouse in upstate New York in the mid-18th century. One of the things that I don't want to forget, and I hope to come back to this later, is when we talk about New Netherland, we really need to talk about early history, pre-contact, the Dutch colony, and then what follows the Dutch colony, what happens in those early years of English dominance, because that Dutch culture continues on, as you can see in the architecture of this building. So on one of the lists that I provided today, I give the ending date for this period of New Netherland at 1750, even though that's somewhat arbitrary. I think that it needs to be looked at in a broader context. This is a painting that I did of Albany in the 1780s. It's the largest painting I ever did. It's 10 feet long, and it depicts the arrival of a sloop, the Experiment. This was a 50-foot sloop that was built in Albany and sailed to China. It was only the 2nd vessel from the United States to sail to China, and it was just a simple Albany sloop. The painting is called The Return of the Experiment. That was the name of the ship. But one of the things that I like to show people in that painting is if you look at the details, you get this interesting combination of cultural artifacts. We have a Dutch house, we have an English house. That is New Netherland. That is only here. That is what makes us distinct. That's why we're not New Englanders. And that mix of culture, I think, should be a strong point of whatever our final product is for the History Center.
What year was that, Len?
That was 1787. In the past, George mentioned in his presentation how elaborately physical models were used to try to convey three-dimensional space And before I got involved with digital modeling, that's exactly what I did. This is a cardboard model of Albany that I built for that painting that we were just looking at. And this is based on paintings and drawings of that time period, descriptions of the buildings, surviving remains of buildings. This particular model got to be quite large. At first I thought I could do this in my studio. It turned out to be too big for that, and by the time I finished it up, I was in a friend's warehouse and the model was 30 feet long. The models could be sometimes very specific. This is the City Hall building in Albany in the 1780s, but you can see that there's some surrounding buildings and little cardboard horses and wagons here. This was effective, but very time-consuming and limited. This is a map of Schenectady in the 1690s. And I was asked by the Historical Society to do a painting of what Schenectady looked like at the time of the massacre, which was 1690. The city was an English city that was attacked by the French and the Indians and pretty much destroyed. And so I started with this wonderful piece of evidence, this survey drawing that was made by a British engineer named Romer. And in Romer's plan, you can see that he shows a small fort. This was the existing fort. After the massacre, he was proposing a much larger fort. You can see the lay of the land. You can see where the streets are. You can see the Mohawk River. You can see the Binnakill Creek. You can see Cowhorn Creek. And if you look at the map very, very carefully and closely, you can see along the creek there's a dam. There's a grist mill with a water wheel. There's a brewery. There's a church. Lots of data here. Now, I was asked to do a painting of this city at that time. I know very little about it. I've been focused for so long on Albany. So I took this information and I developed a digital model. Now, the digital model is pretty much a direct reflection of the Romer map. There's the small fort. There's one of the stockade walls which went into the river, and the other stockade wall which went over to the creek on the other side. And then you see the locations of some of the more prominent buildings, a little cluster of buildings right there on State Street. Digital models, as you could see with George's incredible model of Chinatown, are amazing tools because you can move around them. You can get into the city. Now, for me as an artist, even developed completely with text, a very simple model, it gives me a sense of where the good subjects are. What are the good places to be working with? This is the area that I was primarily fascinated by because of the dam and the grist mill and the water wheel, the brewery and the church. So I sort of focused on that spot as a potential subject for my painting. I had a wonderful opportunity to go to the Netherlands while I was working on this project, and I had two objectives when I went there. One was to investigate 17th century architecture, particularly of the people of Friesland, who were people who had settled in Schenectady, and also to do some research on Van Curler's ship, that bark that we were looking at. The photographs that you see here I took at the Open Air Museum in Arnhem. I wanted to go to the Netherlands in the winter, even though my wife thought that was a pretty stupid idea. She did enjoy herself. She did come out to Arnhem with me on this day. It had snowed, it was cold. It is a park. I was the only one in the whole 100-acre park. There wasn't a footprint in the snow. So it was a great day for me to get around and photograph things. And really a sense of the 17th century. These are sketches that I made for the grist mill. This is the finished painting.